stand up. I'm sure many of you know Robert personally. He would hate this reference if you know him very well, that I'm the Hillary Clinton of his organization. When the phone rings at 2 a.m., I'm the guy that gets the call, and that's literally what happened. But that actually happened in IHG, which is a project or a pitch that I worked with Robert on, and I have an interesting case for you that I dug out. I wasn't sure if I was going to present it, but based upon what I've heard so far, I think it may make sense to get into. But before we do that, let me just make sure that I have my clicker and everything all set up. So we've got, it is beautiful here, and I know that, so clear disclosure, yes, I lead our North American CRM engagement practice, as well as the social customer care globally. And it's an interesting juxtaposition because really it's an interesting sort of right brain, left brain, art versus science mix. Social being something that is obviously new and somewhat fuzzy, CRM being something that is obviously known, has proven business value, and is commercial. So that's what I'm really going to talk about, is that intersection and how I enter into it. And quite frankly, the folks in this room, you're the magicians who I come to and say, this is something that I'd like to do, either as part of a campaign or I have an interesting development in social that I want to leverage. But I don't think that my PR team is really getting it. So what am I going to do? So without further ado, let's dig into our slides. Let me make sure I've got this. So this is not me. I don't know if you can see what I do. But when I talked to Robert about, well, what would be appropriate, know your audience, what would be appropriate, and I said, is something, we're an agency. I need you to do something with sizzle, something kind of sexy. What is it? People expect Don Draper, they expect, and I should add that if you know Robert, he has I have the height and hair advantage. He has the advantage of being my boss. But in talking to my boss about what might make sense, I said, well, what if I parachute in? Right, sort of facetiously, and he said, if you parachuted in with an email on and I'll say your backside, he said something else, they've probably seen it before and they've probably done it, right? They know email. That's not really what they want to hear from you about, but they want to hear what you do. So let's talk about what I do and where, again, I think it intersects with everything that you know. This is the slide that I would refer to as my obligatory, well, the internet is big, right? The internet is interesting. It's amazing. There are more people on Facebook than there are in the Western Hemisphere. There are more more tweets than rays of light in a given day. Those numbers and infographics are fun. They sometimes don't really tell a story, and that's what I'm after. I'm after the behavior, the narrative of people. And so the first three here, number 2 is interesting. 1 out of 5 people meet online. 1 out of 5 divorces are blamed on Facebook. It may just be a general stat of relationships. So those are really stats about behavior. Obviously, gaming, advertising on gaming platforms and such. But number 4 is one that, as an agency guy, that is a problem for me. That something like Travelocity, or where people are making peer-to-peer recommendations, word of mouth, is far outstripping my ability to influence consumers' decisions, or in the case of B2B, someone who may be purchasing a solution from one of my tech clients over the course of a 9-month sales cycle. Word of mouth is going to drive conversion in a much greater impact than my activity is going to. The last one is something that is interesting, I think, to this audience, which would be, and I don't know if you've heard this, that obviously with Gen X, I'm Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and now millennials, annoyingly many of whom work for me and get none of my references in the office, they don't have email addresses when they go to college, right? So this specific example was pulled from, I think it's Boston College, when folks were showing up, students were not being given a university, .edu email address. So it's really bring your own email, right? Because, and this is where you've got to dig into the stat, it's a little misleading, they're using their own. So their default is Gmail. Even though they were given a Boston College email address, they continue to use their own. So if you just look at it on its face, you think, well, email adoption amongst millennials is dropped dramatically, and that may be the case in some sense, but we're slightly off in our perception if we don't dig into the data. And so the way that I think about this And again, a reference that none of the millennials who work for me would know. They think of Bob Dylan as someone with a Christmas album. But there is something happening here, but not everyone knows what it is, right? So as an agency, as a marketer, what my job is to do is to exploit, right, what our clients' competitors don't understand or what they may be missing, right? And that's really the work that I do. So since it's 9:20, I don't know if everybody remembers this pop cultural reference. If you can't see, there's someone who is not understanding his audience. So we have a king, in this case it happens to be Mel Brooks, and he's being given some bad news, which is, sir, the peasants are revolting. Right? Does anybody know the line? I always think of this. Yeah, they stink on ice, right? So, silly, yes. Timeless, yes. Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. But highly relevant to today's, right, to our world. We've seen this at a global level. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Salesforce. Mark Manahoff did his road show, his keynote, and I think mine is better, but I'm just joking. His keynote last year about the cloud and how the cloud was going to transform the enterprise. At Ogilvy, we call this socializing the enterprise, right? That in order to meet the changing expectations and demands of our customers, we need to be more flexible. We need to work in real time, right? We can't be tone deaf. We can't have these moments where we say our business is impenetrable to negative sentiment, right? We have to be listening. And so this is a lot of work, obviously, that is done by the sort of, in our world, in my world, the PR side of the fence. Or at Ogilvy, we have a unit called Social at Ogilvy, which pulls from all the different divisions, from direct marketing, from NEO, our performance division, from Ogilvy One, which is the direct marketing company, which I and Robert really worked initially for. That's where we met. But this idea of non-understanding, right? Not perceiving things properly. And this, I'll give you a little sort of personal anecdote. If you looked at this picture, you probably would gather that at some place, perhaps in the Middle East, you might be able to see that. You might be surprised to know that this is actually a photograph of Tehran, right? And without getting, again, into the politics of it, looking at it strictly from understanding our audience, understanding as marketers what's happening out there. My wife had the opportunity, unlike most of us, she was in Tehran a couple of years ago. Now, this was before the Arab Revolution, before the Green Revolution, before the Arab Spring. But she was she's in fashion, she was in a park in Tehran, and a group of young girls saw that she was wearing Western clothing. And they walked up to her, and they were dressed something like this. But they ran up and said, "Are you from America?" Yes, I am. Do you know Britney Spears? Right? Well, we don't like her anymore. She's not cool. We like Taylor Swift. And here's my iPod with my Taylor Swift music. Okay? And I have a BlackBerry because I like to text and email on my BlackBerry, but I use my iPhone. This happened. And it might surprise most of us, right? And you can sort of back up my little anecdote by going and watching that fountain of insight and political wisdom, The Daily Show. They did a similar thing where they took a trip to Iran and they found that, hey, they're just like us. And they're a very, very wired society. They are very tapped into our pop culture. Sure, the government, that there are issues there. But the idea being that people's misperceptions, right, become our opportunities, right? So, and again, I'll get into a case a little bit later where we exploited the misperceptions about that one brand had for their loyal followers to turn that into an advantage for us, where we basically stole customers for one of our clients, that being IHG. So, sort of continuing this theme, what is the opportunity for those of you in this room, right? So far I've talked about sort of branding at a high level, which is really the thrust of what I'm going to focus on. But this is an email audience. And so in thinking about it for you, you can't see the stats, but essentially what this infographic does, and I like this one because it has several data points where it points out that there are certain advantages to moving into social over, let's say, email, for example. Up front, we have that, I know you can't see, but 47% of adults are in social, 73% of teens being defined as people between 12 and 17, okay? But most of those teens were probably not filing taxes, so they're not submitting a tax form. It may be just a function of being younger and I have a phone and I'm really not using email yet. Now, when I go into the workforce, I'm going to begin using email. But the fact is, if you look at these stats, for example, there's 750 million Facebook accounts, right? 300 million Twitter accounts. There are 2.9 billion email accounts. Right? Now, obviously, there's the advantage of time, but email is still a prevalent and dominant platform. And so, how do we leverage that? How do we take advantage of where the fact that email has this breadth, and are there particular advantages to using email with consumers, with prospects, in B2B? But going back to for a second, this idea of then not understanding. So, I don't know how many of you are familiar with all of these cases, but we know something for certain. Right? We do know that there is something happening here, that the world has changed, and that social is more than a buzzword. It is more than a buzzword for consumers. Why? Because they now have the ability to control the conversation. Right? So the analogy again has been made between the Arab Spring, right, and essentially the customer spring. The fact that the fellow who flew on United, and he begged them to put his guitar, right, treat it safely. And they literally tossed it around on the tarmac as he was watching the plane being loaded with bags. So he wrote a song about it, put it on YouTube, and I think has now made a career doing speaking engagements to audiences like this about the negative customer service experience he had. Kenneth Cole, during the height of the Arab Spring, thought that it would be very funny and cheeky to tweet, "Oh, everyone in Egypt is rioting because they've heard about the latest Kenneth Cole sale." Not a great idea. Or Apple. So interestingly, Apple, if you think about it, not active in social at all. Now, they imply some social solutions on the website. They have a community where you can ask questions about Apple products, but they don't crowdsource. They're not like Starbucks. They're not looking for interesting feedback on product. Best Buy, great example. I'm really glad that was mentioned earlier. Fantastic success story in social, right? The 12 Force. What benefit did it have for the business? Not quite sure, right? So Apple does none of that and has done quite nicely. However, this latest Maps debacle, where you'll wind up in the Pacific Ocean if you're trying to find the Golden Gate Bridge. And while I would say that obviously that's not a social media disaster, I think that it did speed up the response that Apple had to put out there in terms of an apology, because social was amplifying negative comments from their audience. So obviously, a misunderstanding or ignoring your audience is, at your peril. So what is the response of folks such as myself and folks that Robert and I really, come to blows, maybe a little strong, but Robert has said, if he says it again, I'm going to go punch him in the face. And that is that as agency people, we want our brands to be the popular kids in the class. Right? If you're watching Mean Girls, you want them to be at the cool table. Brands want to be followed on Twitter. They want to be liked on Facebook, right? They want to be human. And we, as marketers, we enable this. So this is pulled directly from the conferences that we ran during Social Media Week. And I think that this is a fine strategy. This is what we should strive for, which is we want to build relationships with our customers over time. These are not transactions. We want to build true value. So as I said, that's the guy who has the Union Jack parachute. He's coming in. What I do day to day, and we mentioned American Express, is to construct a dialogue. Right? And I'll show you an example of how we leverage social to construct a dialogue that drives true business value. But an ongoing dialogue with clients, with customers. And when I think of integrated channels, I think of active listening across channels. So I may have interacted with you on phone, but then you will in turn hear that same language, or I may reference that conversation in email. And so you feel as though you are really truly dealing with an intelligent being, not just simply a series of one-off touches. Exclusive offers. So as in a relationship, when do you ask, are we exclusive? Are you seeing anyone else? Or in this case, it may be, when are you really going to give me value as a brand in exchange for me being I'm a loyalty member, right? I follow you on Facebook, right? I follow you on Twitter. What am I getting in exchange for that? Is it simply that I had to like you in order to enter a contest? And if so, what are you doing with that data? Am I going to receive a relevant touch 3 months down the line based upon those interactions? No? Then why did you bother? So I'm going to go in and essentially at one point clean up my privacy settings in Facebook, and I'm just going to drop you from my world. And then personalization or relevance. This is really the linchpin. I know probably been talked about in this group for quite a long time. But relevant content. If it's relevant to me, that's going to drive earned. Right? That's something else that we talk about is earned, paid, owned, and earned being the most valuable. Right? Because that is that word of mouth, that one-to-one peer recommendation. And then innovation. Innovation, and I know we have a great number of vendors here, and that's something I'm always looking for. How do I innovate? And how do I innovate inside of areas that people may not be thinking that there's an opportunity? So in my case, often it's how do I innovate inside of a call center? I mean, where would you rather not, is there any place you'd rather not go? But that's what I do. I've come to Salt Lake quite a bit for American Express, Salt Lake, and Ogden. So I'm here all the time. Why? Because to me, the call center is the original listening post. Which, when I say that to people in social, they say, I never thought of it that way. And I say, yes, you're killing each other from an influencer on Twitter. You may have no idea if that customer is a gold, platinum, lead customer, but I know that call coming into my call center, I have an influencer right there. I can see it. And you, if you thought about it that way, you would show ROI. Instead, you're killing each other for someone who's just tweeting that they like the product and have probably never even used it. They may want a freebie. So innovation in places that we don't normally see it. And then finally, all of this is leading up to you like us, we like you, we have this fabulous relationship, I have a whole strategy, I've enabled true engagement, and now I want you to trust me. I want you to really essentially have a relationship, and then as mentioned earlier as well, with the brand, right? Not product-centric, with the brand. That's the goal. That's what brands want. Very complex journeys over time. As confusing as walking through the IKEA section if you don't know all the different sort of cutouts, sneak from the marketplace back to pottery and stuff like that. And these very powerful moments of truth. So that's what, as an agency, I think that sometimes we create. We create these expectations that customers will have a relationship with the brand where they are going to trust us as almost as a guide. When this is the reality, as I mentioned earlier. So we've engaged in social media. I've brought you into the fold as part of a campaign. But the folks that are doing that oftentimes are not thinking about a relationship over time. Right? Their goal is simply, how many people did I reach? What's the size of my audience? Did I activate a couple of influencers? And those bloggers, how many mentions did I have? I'm looking at it a different way. I'm looking at it that I've set myself up for a very, very painful moment when you call in to my call center or you receive an email that is disconnected from everything else that's gone before. There's no actual integration. And then you say, I'm just another number to you, right? The situation is even worse than it was before because we've promised and we've set expectations, but I think you may have heard, the difference between expectations and reality is what causes stress. And so we create a stressful environment for our customers, for our prospects, okay? And I love the one on the right, integrated campaign. Well, I have a website and I have some email. I've got integration. Fantastic. Let me spray some of that across. That's not going to work. So this is where I need a little AV help because I'd like to show you that fountain of wisdom. George very, very nicely describes what I've just outlined for you. So there you go.
You met her at the supermarket. How'd you do that?
Produce section. Very provocative area. A lot of melons and shapes. Everyone's squeezing and smelling. It just happened.
So when are you going to see her?
Tonight.
What's her name?
I don't know.
How could you not know her name?
I was a little nervous. I got distracted. It had something to do with a car or a fish.
All right, I'm out of here. Have fun with what's her name.
Oh, well.
Now you got to ask her name. It's so embarrassing.
No, it isn't. I can find out.
Yeah.
So, am I back? Great, thank you. So there is the situation that I often have to apologize for as someone coming from a global marketing services firm, Ogilvy, where we have set up this situation. Jerry is our brand, right? And Jerry has initial success with a prospect. And what happens is that Jerry is going to essentially lose that opportunity because he has not captured data. He does not know her name, right? And this is not a long-term solution. This is not going to survive. So this is the episode called The Junior Mint. It's a great episode. And it ends with Jerry screaming random names out the door. And he never gets it right until the very last second, until it's too late. And that moment where it's too late may be the moment in which if we in this room who we think in terms of scalable, repeatable, measurable, testing, right? In those terms, that rigor, that discipline, we need to bring that into social. And that's where I think the opportunities really lie. So I want to talk about how we've done that at Ogilvy. But what's our secret weapon? What's the secret sauce? And this is that I dug out to sort of basically justify what I've been doing. I haven't even been using this stat, and I may go back to work and do this quite a bit. But I tweeted this as Ogilvy Digital, which is another one of my jobs. So I will be tweeting everyone so use the Twitter feed. So I am living and breathing engagement every day as Ogilvy Digital with, I think, 41,000 followers. And so the fact is in there, what is my job as if someone on Twitter? It's not just to simply promote Ogilvy and say nice things about us. It's actually to engage with my audience and provide value. Okay? And so that's a teaser for something that's coming up. But what we've seen is that 82% of individuals are comfortable sharing personal data via email. So to me, that is your competitive advantage, right? We have these social campaigns, social activity, and I haven't mentioned, as I said, I know I've used Twitter and Facebook sort of, but we can talk about Pinterest, we can talk about anything. To me, it is all one in the same areas where prospects are sharing information, sharing recommendations. I need to wade into that and to bring them into my treatment, and basically it's a value exchange. And again, I'll talk about this more in a moment. But that sharing of information via email is a powerful, powerful moment that you can exploit, and it's something that your peers in social do not have, right? So this is what's occurring inside of my world right now. We have two competing schools of thought. One is CRM, so what I've described. 1981 was the first loyalty program at an airline. I think it was a couple 100,000 loyalty members, right? And now that is 500 million loyalty members in airline programs. Flying out here on my United flight, they promoted this in the in-flight video, right? And now this is extended into, obviously, credit cards, into automotive. If you've been to Las Vegas recently, you walk through the Wynn or any other casino, and they're promoting the loyalty card, sign up. So it has reached into every industry, right? And then we have, on the other side of it, social. Social. The CRM proponents would advocate social is fluffy. It's about engagement, things I can't measure. It's about these hot, sort of interesting channels, but really, where is the value? But for right now, what we're seeing, there you go, you weren't expecting that, is that there's been a little bit of a social eclipse. Social has eclipsed CRM in terms of, advocates inside of our agency. It is what is currently driving a lot of conversation. And my position, our position, is that is not going to last long term, that the waters will recede somewhat, and that we as proponents of CRM, of email, of, in my case, the contact center channel, will bring a level of discipline into social, and it will become true social CRM, right? So I am beginning a conversation in social, I am engaging, I'm doing what we saw earlier, but that I have to capture the data so I can develop that relationship over time. I can segment and I can drive true value to the business. So even if we started a conversation on Facebook, perhaps we hopped it over a wall into a user community where I'm nurturing that conversation, and then in turn I drive that lead into a lead nurture program where there's a one-to-one relationship with a salesperson in a contact center who then sets up a face-to-face appointment with an account manager. And this is something that we're seeing, again, with some of our tech clients by way of long-term technical sales. So this is the team I work on that Robert leads. So CRM, engagement, and strategy. And the three sort of pillars of our consultancy: big ideas and creativity. We are an ad agency. Data, big data is coming. I leave a data trail everywhere I go. What do consumers want? What do people want in exchange for handing over some of that data? And then marketing platforms. What are the tools that are going to enable us to build upon the first two and really have a long-term relationship? So I wanted to show you a couple of examples, and I'll go pretty quickly through this. But one, you may be familiar with Watson. Watson was a campaign that we created. We heard about some work that was being done at IBM, which was by the way of artificial intelligence, and that a computer could sound human. And you may have seen it on Jeopardy, where Watson competed against folks on Jeopardy and won. We had a landing page, we had a manifesto, we did everything that we do as an agency, right? But email. In the end, right, everyone that I acquired, right, all of the conversations that were started via someone watching Jeopardy, coming to the landing page, the manifesto, really a linchpin of a large degree was highly targeted, highly relevant email, where I was using email essentially as a part of the lead nurture stream as a proxy for a touch from a salesperson. Right. So if you were a hospital administrator interested in business intelligence, we crafted email for that particular pain point to further the conversation. And so what happened was, we have our top line results, which are fantastic, and the things that are interested perhaps to the brand side, Conan, fantastic that we had, Conan, Andy Richter was replaced by Watson, and we had it on The Daily Show. But in the end, we're driving performance using email at these very powerful moments of truth as part of our demand gen or lead gen strategy. Now, this is what I kind of teased earlier. What have we found that why will they hand over data? And I think of this as, when I was a kid, my mother used to drag me to discount stores, and there would be no salespeople. There'd be no waiting room. I'd have to crawl under a rack and hide for an hour while she went and shopped. So in exchange for not having the amenities of a mall, or not having the salespeople that you would find at a fine store, you were receiving value, right? Well, in this day and age, consumers are sharing their data in exchange for value. That's what they want. For them, it is about getting something in return, right? And because if you think about the millennial shifts, someone who is younger, we call them here cash for information. 94% of young professionals will share information in exchange for monetary benefits. Now, as you move up the scale, if you move into affluence, the number decreases, but obviously generational trends will play out, and we will see that this will become the predominant fact. And so here we have some examples. If you look at, the first one is Mint. I don't know if you're all familiar. Mint was a startup that was acquired by Intuit, and my POV would be that Intuit, the software you load up onto your computer, is going to go away. Your data will live in the cloud, and essentially Intuit looks like they're going to transition over to Mint. They're not building the Intuit software, not refreshing it as much. They're going to migrate into Mint, and Mint is in the cloud, where essentially at no cost I am giving you information in exchange. I'm seeking monetary benefit, ways of saving money. Now with the Mikey Fuel Band, right? What's more personal than my resting heart rate, right? And all of this data is being streamed. It will be captured in one place, and potentially, now obviously we have the creep factor, which we have to address, but if the value prop is there, I would argue that consumers will, in exchange for enhanced services and enhanced value, will hand over that sort of data. And the last one is a really interesting one that we actually did, Ogilvy did in Asia, which is Unilever, one of our clients, has ponds skincare clinics where you can get a skincare assessment from a machine, which will then give you product recommendations. Now, they have actual estheticians, but there's a handheld version of this, which eventually we would see being used at a point of sale in a department store. Okay, so in exchange for handing over data about your skin, we're going to give you recommendations and we're going to give you value. And here's an example which I really like. This is out of Denmark, and it's from Jimmy Sjugard, who headed Ogilvy Denmark, and he did such a great job with this. We brought him over to New York to work with, and he's heading up an element of our CRM practice in New York. And we have a lot of numbers here, but we had obviously a large campaign, 250,000 emails per week. We had 40 different separate communication flows. We had click-through rate 15%. Et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of data throwing at you, but what we were doing was, and I'll show you in a second what it involved, but it was really reaching out to wireless subscribers for the Danish carrier, which is Telia, and it was up or cross-selling them on pricing plans or enhancements to their service. And the key here was at the right time. We had three sort of core beliefs that we brought into existence in execution. Was to communicate at the right time for the subscriber, right? Which meant, in many cases, at the end of the month, before your pricing plan, before the cycle kicked over, right? I used to work for Verizon Wireless, and some people who were savvy enough would call up and check their drop call minutes. This is going back a ways. And you'd get a little discount at the end of each month in the form of money back. We replicated that type of activity in an outbound touch to the subscribers to say, not by way of drop calls, but you could have saved this much money on a different pricing plan. You've been roaming internationally, so you would benefit. So highly relevant, and then that in turn again is the right message, and then the right channel, right? So it may be creepy to get a phone call if you're a consumer about your roaming activity if you really haven't used that much, but we could save you $5, let's say. You would welcome that phone call if you're traveling internationally and you didn't realize it was $2 a minute when you were on the cruise ship. And so that context is obviously going to determine the channel fit. And so using all of those, we created this campaign where we had basically the core of it was a dynamic email derived from subscriber data. So in the system we used there was, and this was what Jimmy did, was Agilic, which I'm not personally familiar with, but the way that it worked was everything from the billing system, the actual calls themselves, we flowed into a single database in which we then kicked out product recommendations, which were, again, timed to the billing cycle, timed to travel, so that we were providing highly relevant messaging across direct mail, across SMS, and the SMS may be, again, it may be the preferred channel for those quick little sort of micro bursts of information, but I view it as nothing more than a short email, right? And I know that mobile is, of course, a huge interest. I look at mobile as there is no mobile. Everything is mobile. You have to make the assumption that you are communicating right now in shorter bursts across multiple channels, but the framework that email provides is the same. Data capture, personalization, relevance. That is the framework. Essentially, if you were to overlay, that's what we've done here. And the results were actually pretty interesting. And working in, again, traditional, let's say, phone channel, I would hope to achieve something like this, where my conversion rate was 62%. So I had an open rate of 56, and within that 56, I had a conversion rate of 62%. And those were subscribers who took us up on a recommendation. So it wasn't simply log in to check your pricing plan. It was actually recommendations to check that we provided to you. Now I'm running a little short on time. I realize so I don't want to overrun. But really what we're doing here is we're enabling the personal narrative, right? So we're not trying to bring you on the brand story. We're trying to go on your journey with you. And I want to talk about really quickly some things we've done that are outside of Facebook and Twitter. Social. SAP has a tremendous user community in blogs, in forums. And so what we did was we treated that as a social channel. We created a listening post, and we extracted data from that. that being through keyword search, through text analysis. And what we did was we actually optimized our email campaign based upon activity that we saw, the conversations we saw, so that when I'm sending an email to a lead or a prospect for SAP, I'm not hitting them with, oh, I see you recently downloaded this white paper. I'm actually using language in the email that I know other SAP developers are using in the real world. So I'm actually creating a real world extension of a dialogue that's occurring already in their social communities. Again, not Facebook and Twitter. And then finally, a case that I've worked on, developed myself, which is a platform at American Express, where now I have over 500 call center agents using a digital platform where I'm pushing out talking points derived from that process that I outlined earlier for SAP, where I'm using a listening post to optimize a dialogue I'm having on the phone. But since at Amex, they tend to be siloed in terms of digital acquisition and tele-acquisition, there's been no follow-up from email. So I'm having a conversation with a prospect, a small business owner who may be interested in a particular card. I have, through an integration of the system that I'm using to push out talking points to the call center, those agents now have the ability to trigger an email which integrates content from that conversation. So it might say, you as a small business owner of a construction firm, we're interested in using a membership rewards points to acquire tools at the Home Depot. And as we discussed, here's how you can do it. So when you sign up for that card, that's the value you're going to see. So it's really active listening across channels. And we're expanding this pilot now at Amex as we speak. And I just want to make sure I'm okay on time. If I say here perfect, fantastic. So where did all of this come from? About 3 years ago, before we won the Intercon IHG business, my phone rang literally at 4 a.m. and it was Robert. And he said, there's a situation we would like to take advantage of. The client has an ask, which is that IHG, one of their competitors, has devalued their loyalty points. So last year you got a free night for 100,000 points. Now it's going to take twice as many or something to that effect. What could we do? And the client was really looking for us to just raise awareness for this snafu in social media. And I said, let's go a little further. Let's be provocative. We haven't won this account yet, so let's go after this. And what we came up with was something called the luckiest loser, which was going into social channels, which again, not Twitter, not Facebook. In this case, it was Flyer Talk. Those were the influencers were. You power travelers out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. And we, through listening to the activity that was occurring in Flyer Talk, had a simple ask, which is, if you're dissatisfied with the devaluing of your loyalty points in this program, send us your email address, and we'll sort of let you in to something. And what we let them into was, we were looking for the biggest loser, the person who had lost the most. And what we were going to do is we were going to match the loss for some of the biggest losers. And for the number one, we were going to give you enough points to fly around the world or stay at every IHG. And would you know that 120,000 of the most loyal members of that competing program sent us their email addresses? And what did we then do? In exchange, we asked them to send us their stay history. And in some cases, they emailed it. In some cases, they actually had to fax it. That was their channel. And we converted over, I believe it was over 100,000 of those from that loyalty program. It made USA Today. We won IHG. Robert, we also this past year won Holiday Inn brand business. I'm not saying it's a direct result of that, but that helped a whole lot because we opened our clients' eyes to a way of using social in a structured way that they had not thought of before, and eventually became Crack the Case, which was a full-blown, sort of less provocative social campaign. So really, that's what I think you have the ability to do. So summing up, email provides a touch point at which consumers are going to hand over information, which you then in exchange can provide value, and that gives you a leg up over social. And really what you can provide your social counterparts is a direct way to show business value and ROI and a relationship over time. So over the next couple of days, to get excited, what I would want to think about is how can we go back, how can we leverage something that folks may be underestimating, or there may be a misperception about what we can do. Because really what you enable us to do is to get back to this moment, sort of the George Bailey moment in the general store, where I really understand and I have that personal, that truly personal interaction in digital. It's not on Facebook where it's a nicety, like an air kiss. It's something real. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Evan. So one of the things that we will be doing at the end of all of the sessions here is we'll be doing roundtables. So actually, if there are questions, Evan is going to be hosting one of those roundtables, and so there'll be a chance just to have dialogue and to talk about the idea of how do we integrate and pull these things together. I really appreciate just the whole emphasis on value and value exchange and finishing up that conversation. So final thank you for Evan, and I want to start bringing up our next panel. So.